What I have here today is the Moondrop Quarks. A couple of things to know before beginning this review is this is personally owned, like most of other IMs that I review, and this is a very budget IM. Maybe, if not, I'm not mistaken, the cheapest IM that ever released by Moondrop. And with that, you have average amount of accessories. You have that Moondrop pouch. I forgot where the hell did I place it. It's a small pouch, useless pouch, but the ear tips here is the usual Moondrop ear tips too, so it's okay, I guess. It's not the worst ear tips yet. It's not the best too, but it's okay. And yeah, the TLDR of this review is going to be this is going to be a solid IM for its price point. However, I'm not going to buy it. Correction, I actually did buy it, but had I heard these before, I would probably not purchase this for my daily driver or just daily use or like occasional use. I'll probably use it occasionally, but I already have the E1K. But in this review, I'm going to compare the Quarks with the E1K, the Final Audio E1K, the Tanjim Tanya, the Moondrop's own spaceship, and of course the Blonde 03s. This one is a bit of a all of these are very similar, however the Blonde 03 is a bit different. But if you're going to purchase the Quarks, I think one of its more enticing qualities is probably the presentation of mid-range. Although the mid-range here is definitely not the best, but that's probably what you're going to look for if you're particularly buying Moondrop IMs, because Moondrop's mid-range are usually one of the most sought out part of its IMs. Like the sought out category is going to be the Moondrop mid-range, because the Moondrop usually follows somewhat of a Harman target or somewhat of a STF target, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so of course Blonde being one of the kings of mid-range is going to be here at its price point. So the build quality here is bad. the cable is okay, I guess. The cable doesn't. It's not shit. It's okay, I guess. It's not the best cable. It's not the worst cable. It's okay. It has L shape jacks. I don't really care about this, to be honest. It also has quite a bit of driver flex going on with these, because these don't have any vents. From what I've heard and what I can check, these don't have any like vent at all. So expect having driver flex when you first put it in your ear. Maybe you can just relieve the pressure by doing some yawning after wearing these. So yeah, the overall tuning here is somewhat of a neutralist V shape. Like I think it's somewhat of a V shape, but it's not very V shape. If you understand, it's mildly V shape, I guess. But I would still consider this a bit V shape tuning, though the elevation is not in the treble region. However, it's more of the mid-range region. If you've seen any of the graphs of the or the measurements of the Moondrop Quarks, you would notice that there is somewhat of a peak on the mid-range around that 3K region, if I'm not mistaken, and that peak sadly affects the sound quality of the Moondrop Quarks quite significantly. The mid-range definitely quite, not significantly, but you would notice that there is a slight smearing there, a slight the presentation of vocals is not as natural as I would prefer them to be. So yeah, for the bass of the Moondrop Quarks, I think this have quite a somewhat of a average speed type of bass, although it's definitely not the most dynamic. But just listening to them, I would expect them to have almost no bass shelf, to be honest. Though after seeing the measurements, I saw what that's quite a significant bass elevation actually at the bass region, but I don't actually perceive that much of an elevation. It's almost as much as the Tanya's, but the Tanya is way punchier. The bass delivery just slams harder in the Tanya overall than the Quarks, and it's very noticeable. It has more bass than the spaceships, though. I think the presentation, the punch and the slam between these two, the spaceship is definitely punchier, but considering the difference, without considering the difference of bass elevation, the bass punch is very similar. So it shows the lack of dynamics here on the Moondrop Quarks, and it's also less dynamic than the E1K and the Blonde. So it's definitely not the most dynamic IEM that I've ever heard. The bass extension is actually pretty okay. It's actually pretty good. You do have quite a bit of rumble to the bass. It's not as resolving as what I hope, but it's quite as resolving as what I expect something this price would be. It's not one-tone-ish, however. It's a bit more resolving than that. The overall mid-range presentation is the majority of mid-range here is actually pretty good. It's not a terribly V-shaped sounding mid-range, not terribly withdrawn sounding mid-range. However, it's not the thickest, it's not the most well-rounded mid-range presentation that I've ever had. Some vocals tend to sound a bit strained and thin, especially for the female vocals. It's not bad, it's not really bad. It tends to get shouty. If you've listened to something like the Show tape, it has that somewhat of a shouty quality of a mid. It's not shouty, to be honest. It's more of a unnaturalness, I guess. Unnatural slight smearing of the harmonics of the vocals. I don't know if that actually explains anything, though. Overall, the mid-range here is pretty solid. However, that one part of the mid-range kind of bothers me a little bit, but not a lot. But usually, when I just listen to a wide range of music, most tracks don't. In most tracks, that peak don't actually bother me. So yeah. Although it might be a deal breaker if you listen to vocals like Melissa Manago or something, you do notice that type of a elevation there, definitely. So yeah, with the comparison of the mid-range in the E1K, the E1K is definitely more flatter in its presentation. The peanut gain of the E1K is maybe slightly less than what I would prefer them to be, but it's definitely closer to what I would think as my preferred neutral target. Definitely much closer. It's only maybe slightly less elevated, ever so slightly less elevated there. Although it's excellent in my opinion. I think the mid-range here is a bit superior to the ones in the Quarks because and it also has a bit warmer body to them, so because you also have that slight lower mid-range elevation. For the Tanyas, it does have the similar effect of slightly being shoutier than neutral, like in the Quarks. However, the peak on the mid range is not as significant. It's definitely not as significant, and it's contoured better because it doesn't just go peak like that. It contours to the treble a little bit better. However, it doesn't go like the SSR type of upper mid range. It goes like brighter and brighter for the treble region, but for the lower treble and the mid treble region, these the mid range, our mid range here slopes down to the treble region. However, it's not a drastic drop of it as these, so it results in a more usually it results in a bit more elevated, I guess, sounding vocals. However, it's a bit more balanced in its harmonics than the Moondrop Quarks. So it doesn't have the type of it doesn't sound that peaky in the what do you call it, in the Township Tanyas. Against the SSR is just shouty. In my opinion, it's overall shouty, it's overall brighter in its vocals. I don't really like the presentation of the spaceship. I mean, the spaceship, it doesn't sound natural to me. It sounds just thin and shouty. However, it's not as bad as the SSR, definitely not. It's not as bad as the SSP, but it's a bit too much for me in the mid-range department. If you don't listen to a lot of very forward vocals, you might not be bothered by it, but it's just, in my opinion, a bit too much if you're looking for that more neutralish presentation. Against a Blonde 03, it's just I think the Blonde 03's presentation of mid-range is the reverse version of the Moondrop Quarks. The Blonde's mid-range is a bit more warmer, it's a bit thicker overall, it has a bit more body to the sound, where the Quark has a peak at 3K, the Blonde has a dip there. So it's a very different presentation of mid-range. I would much prefer the mid-range in the Blonde 03, to be completely honest. Maybe the IEM that I would prefer the mid-range over the Blonde 03s at around this price range. Maybe not around this price range. It's probably going to be the cheapest I'd go is probably maybe the Aria. I mean, the mid-range in the Aria is better content, it's better, it's more balanced there. However, it's quite the mid-range in the Quarks is a bit too thin for me for it to be what I would consider enjoyable and neutral. So yeah, this one's also not neutral. This is the mid-range here is definitely colored, but I think the coloring here is a bit more tasteful than the ones in the Quarks, because it has a bit more weight and body to it. So yeah, I guess that's that. Yeah, about the treble region, I think the treble region has quite a bit. It doesn't have a lot of problems with them, yet it just doesn't sound that impressive either. So the treble presentation is just treble presentation. It's not sharp, it's not peaky, it's not bright at all. It's quite safe actually. It's good in terms of treble presentation. I think it's a bit too dark for my personal taste. I would prefer a bit more edge to the treble region in the Quarks, definitely. I think it's a bit darker than the Tanyas with the white bore. I think they are about similar in terms of forwardness with the Tanyas with the small bore, which I don't really like. So yeah, I would much prefer a bit more brighter in its treble in its presentation. However, it's slightly more well extended than the ones in the final E1K. I think the E1K's upper treble is a bit too rolled off, in my opinion. It's not really that they don't have any extension. They do have elevations in the most upper treble, but the bridge between the mid treble and the upper treble, it's a bit empty there, in my opinion, for the final E1K. So for me, I don't think that it's quite a problem, but for a lot of people that don't actually hear things up there, like in the more upper treble, like Jason probably only hear, yeah, I think he only hears about 17K. I don't think he would get much enjoyment of the upper treble elevation here, although I still think it's still not enough. I think it's still less than I would prefer. The treble in the SS, I did a comparison about the treble here already, so I'll just go to the spaceship. With the spaceship's treble, I think the spaceship is definitely brighter. It's definitely prone to sibilance more than the what do you call it? The Quarks. I think my preferred treble would be a slightly more geared towards the spaceship, but I would prefer it to be a bit less. So maybe between these two, but a bit. It's like 40-60 or 30-70 different. So it's a bit more towards the spaceship. However, I do prefer less treble than the spaceship. Against the Blano Freeze have that that I think it's a particularly weird presentation of treble. It's not. I don't see any mistakes or any like fatal wrongdoings, fatal mistakes on the upper in the treble region of the Blano Freeze. I would prefer slightly more contoured treble region and slightly less peaky treble performance in the Blano Freeze though. The energy there, I think it hits the mark, I guess, in my opinion. So I would prefer the treble performance of the Blano Freeze rather than the what do you call it? The Moondrop Quarks. I think the Moondrop Quarks just sound a bit dull in comparison, and it ties in with the technical performance. I think the problem with the Quarks is it's most of them. It's not the tuning. I think it's more of the lack of technical performance it has, and that's the main reason why I'm not going to actually use these a lot. Maybe when I work out or something, I would probably use them, but not a lot of times. I think the Quarks is, in my opinion, just a tad too blunt in its transient response. It's slightly blunt, but I would not really blame it. It's a very, very budget IM, but I don't think it's the fastest type of attack in its transient response. I don't think it's also the most detailed. The soundstage is okay, I guess. Soundstage is a bit wider than the SS. No, I mean, and the fucking spaceship. It's about equal width as these two, maybe slightly wider or equal with the blondes too. So it sports a very modest amount of stage, but the imaging here is so diffused. It's so blurry. I think it's quite like the imaging in the Blano Freeze, which is not as good. The Tanya is much more pinpoint in its imaging if you're comparing these two. Maybe the blonde's also even a bit better, but it's a similar amount of imaging as the Blano Freeze, so it's not the best. It definitely has worse imaging than the E1K, and all of these are relatively budget IMs, like even comparing it with the Quarks. So I'm not like over comparing these. So yeah, I think that's, in my opinion, the more problem. And you also have that thing with the dynamics. It's not the best, definitely not. if you've, and I haven't posted the T-Force Yuan Li yet, so I can't really talk about that yet as of now. But it's definitely a boring, in my opinion, type of IM, so I don't really like it. But it's good. It's good for its price. I'm not going to say that it's bad and you should not buy them if you want this type of sound signature. I'm saying that there are quite a few other IMs that does it better. Mainly, like, almost all of these. Yeah. So that's it for the review. Don't forget to watch Jason's video, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Hopefully you would do that finally. See you next time, Godspeed.